Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew Beck. This is my talk, an earful of intent. So this talk is about two things. It's about psychoacoustics, which is like how we hear and the actual like physicalness of it, but also the kind of like mechanisms that feed into the brain and work that way, and how that kind of relates to mixing, specifically for multiplayer games. And I'm using like mixing in a very broad sense. It's not just like levels of EQ, but kind of just like how everything balances together. So like the frequency content of the sound source, the runtime effects, how distance affects it, and then of course there's always the levels in EQ comes at the very end of all that. So as anybody here knows, even though it uses the same kind of fundamental mixing techniques as linear media, audio in games is quite a different beast. And largely that's due to the nonlinear mixing. At any time, players can do anything you can think of, and often many things you didn't think about, too. So managing that complexity is difficult for any game. But multiplayer games are especially difficult. They can make single-player games look like linear media. So there's like four main goals that I would say mix for multiplayer games. Just the first is, what I've already talked about, you've got to manage the linear complexity, the nonlinear complexity, so the player can do anything. Is that text too small for anybody to read? Okay. There's not much text after this, so it's all good. So you have to manage kind of the nonlinear nature. The player can do anything at any time. But then you also have to manage the nonlinear nature of the other characters. The other players can do anything at any time as well. And everybody could have a different build, and they could all be in having a unique build at the same time. And somehow you have to meet all these goals and also make it sound good. So that's the goals of the developer, the audio content creator. But players usually have like a different goal in mind. So the only thing that they care about is just information. How does the sound relate to the game? So like this player, my reaction to this is that I just hate footstep sounds so much in so many games. They're always way too loud, and like if the animator gets the timing just wrong on the animation cycle for walking, it sounds like horses galloping everywhere. But players don't agree with that, especially in games like PUBG, which this is from. There's so many videos on YouTube about improving these footstep sounds, which really just means making them louder. But, they're right, because the footsteps are like a source of information for them. That's like their battlefield awareness. So like my kind of artsy feeling on footsteps shouldn't be dominating the mix and stuff like that. It's not really relevant because footsteps should support the gameplay. This isn't a single player experience where you want to show some certain emotion and convey something. I think conveying like being true to the gameplay and supporting the gameplay, I think, is the most critical thing to do, even before the make it sound amazing stuff. For single-player games, keep the footsteps a lot low, because you shouldn't have to like know that you're walking right when you're pushing right on the stick. Also, does anyone ever check out the forums on any of the games they play on too? Because there's usually a lot of feedback. And it's really easy to search for audio feedback because there's only two sounds you need to search for, audio and sound. And there's like a very small percentage of players who really care, which is probably equivalent to the percentage of developers who care about sound. And they'll love you if you interact with them and talk with them and like work with them on some of these things. And I always have like a where there's smoke, there's fire approach. So, they might be wrong about what they're asking for, but if they're complaining, there's probably a problem. You have to work with them sometimes to figure out what exactly that problem is, because it might not be what they think it is. So, just how... Let's see how do I put this. So, I think this video illustrates really well how players think about sound. So I'm just going to play. Whoa. Step ahead. Is the audio working? So I don't know if you caught it at the beginning, but like it really wasn't very clear where that was coming from. And I think it's behind the wall somehow. It's just getting obstructed. Yeah, and so like this is what they care about. Like this is more important to them. I think that clarity in a mix is what should come first for multiplayer games. So like I think that the kind of power fantasy style of weaponry is really good for single player games, maybe some types of games, obviously. But in like this kind of game, you can mask other player sounds. You have to think about how the sounds interact and work together. So how can we like achieve clarity given all the complexity that like, multiplayer games have? So I think the first step is just understanding how the ear works and how psychoacoustics work, and understanding like how does sound get from sound waves and into your consciousness. So let's go on a journey to the inner ear. I didn't know which one to use, so I just used all of them. So there's a technical word which is source separation for how do we basically separate sound. So how do we go from all of those sources on the left into a single stream of audio, and then we can hear it and we can pick up each one of them individually. Some of it might be experience and training, but most of it is pretty hard-coded into how the ear is created physically. I mean, kids can do it pretty soon after being born. It doesn't take that much learning, whereas most brain tasks take a lot of time for kids to learn. Another name that you probably have heard about before, the cocktail party problem. This is a pretty famous way of expressing it. So, like, these floating brains with something coming out of them, they're able to kind of like pick out a single voice from the crowd and focus on that. And so like, how do they do that? My favorite way to look at this problem is actually this boat on a lake. So if you kind of consider a lake, there's two thin streams coming out of it from the top. Let's say that I've placed a handkerchief across each one of those streams, and you sit between them, and you're just watching the handkerchiefs move with the motion of the waves on top of the water. So could you look at the handkerchiefs on top of those two streams and know how many boats there are, how big are each one of those boats, where is each one of those boats, and what shape are those boats? I mean, that's exactly what our ears are doing. We're actually able to extract a ton of information from very little information, these waves going up and down. And it's pretty amazing that it works. And a lot of it is pretty easy to understand physically. Vision, by comparison, is mostly processed in the brain. So it's a lot of magic stuff that happens. I mean, we understand how a lot of it works through, like, experiments, through people who had parts of their brains knocked out of them. So, like, we know where they are because of that. But, like, there's a lot of kind of stuff we don't understand about vision. Whereas with sound, so much of it is physical that it's actually pretty easy to grab. And also, a lot of it happens before entering in your kind of, like, main brain area where there's, like, learning and neurons. So, like, that means that a lot of stuff is already processed and filtered out and kind of, like, chosen before it even enters your, like, subconscious to conscious. So, like, there's some things that you literally just cannot hear based on how it works. You'll understand later in this talk. So, and I think that, like, understanding how it works can really make you understand, like, why these certain mixing techniques that we've used over a very long time, why they work. I mean, I think most people already know, how to achieve clarity and how to do, like, make everything kind of have its own range and, like, do the frequency slotting and stuff. But, like, understanding why they work, I think is, instead of kind of following the rules, you'll be able to kind of, like, use them to your advantage if you understand how it works. So, start with the ear itself. Those are the two weird potato chip things on either side of your head. And, they actually uniquely identify you more than your fingerprints. And when I first heard about that in college, I started taking photos of everybody's ears. Well, I, like, found on my desktop, there was, like, an ears folder full of pictures of ears, and I just, like, realized how creepy it was, so I stopped doing that. I kind of think they're fascinating. Yeah, they're not the most personally identifiable information about you. That's your browser history. So, yeah, the outer ear is like where two key features about source separation happen. The first one's really simple, and I'm sure you guys know about both of these. It takes longer for a sound to reach one ear than the other, based on where it is. So, like, just the amount of time it takes air to travel from one ear to the other, that's called the interaural time difference. Interaural time difference. And it's also called ITD. So, so as long as kind of like a later step can like match the phases of both these sounds on your ears, your ITD kind of like determines, like, it's the first kind of step at separating sounds. The second way that you know is just like due to the fact that ears are just really weird shapes. They filter sounds based on the position in a really, really detailed way. A sound can move in a very, very small distance, and it'll change the filter effect. Your ears are basically filters. The way that they bounce around all these things, it's complicated and has all these weird crevices and stuff, just so that, you know, that tiny, tiny difference in any tiny difference can make a difference in the filtering of the sound when it gets into your ear. So obviously those are HRTFs, which I'm sure most of you are aware of. You know, those are, for those who aren't, it's like head-related transfer functions. And if some people think they're a little mysterious, let's remove the mystery. They're basically just given a sound in an ear, what's the filter for that position for each ear? So, I mean, you just imagine it as an EQ, like lots and lots of EQs recorded over, like, they record the EQ at this position, this position, this position. And so it's just a filter based on where the sound is coming from in relation to your ear. You know, transfer function really just is a word in sound for filter. You know, it's just some academics use it because it makes them sound smart. They get tenure. So just call them head-related filter things. I don't know. But HRTFs, I think, got a very bad rap for a while. Because people said they wouldn't work given the shape of everybody's ears are different. So, like, how can you map one person's ear to another person's ear because the filtering is different on each one of them? Because everyone's, as I said, everyone's ears are totally unique. But that's just wrong. You know, multiple studies have shown that, like, they've given people prosthetic ears, which basically looks like a butcher job at Ferengi ears. You know, and within a few minutes, people got used to the new filter things. Like, maybe they were disoriented for a few minutes, but then they got used to it really quickly. If you ever listen to a binaural recording and just see how accurate some of that is, you know that it's false because those obviously don't match your ears, but they work. You can adapt to new ones really easily. And the reason why is because your understanding of the position of a sound in relation to the filtering that your ear does, it doesn't depend on, like, absolute position. It means, like, what I mean to say is, like, it's not like you hold your head still and you just listen to the sound coming in and it's like, I know over the years of my life, I've remembered every single filter difference, you know, across those and subconsciously, and it's like applying that. Actually, it's actually due to the changes in the filtering as you move. So, like, they've done these other studies where they've held someone's head completely still. And when you can't move your head, you can't position sounds as well. Because, and you'll notice this now that I mention it, if you're ever, like, listening for a sound, you'll, like, move your head slightly, tilt it, or something like that. Like, cats do it all the time with their ears. It's really adorable. So, like, it's not the absolute position of where it is. It's, like, how you kind of change your head and you can hear it changing. That way, like, we can adapt to the new frequencies really easily. That's why HRTFs work. And that's also why they don't work for 3D games most of the time, like 3D shooters that you're playing on the PC or console, because the camera's static when you're sitting still looking. It's not moving. And when you, like, do move, you're moving like this. You're moving kind of in this very smooth left and right position. You're not, like, being able to tilt or anything like that. And so it doesn't really use HRTFs to their advantage. But that's also why in VR, they're awesome, because VR captures those little tiny movements. And that's why HRTFs are no longer getting a bad rap. because they work really well in VR because they depend on these small position changes. Okay, so covered the outer ear. Now we go to the inner ear. Let's see if I can move it. So that says, I don't know if you can see that, but in the external auditory canal in that photo, you see how there's like a little bump underneath it? It's basically like this. It's not super important to this talk, but I think it's so cool. It's like a little resonant chamber inside there that actually resonates and boosts the frequencies, the same exact frequencies that our vocal cord produces. So it's like this really awesome example of how we evolved kind of at the same time, our vocal cords and the ears inside. And let's see, I don't know my masses. It also accounts for that little, if you, that little bump in the loud, does everyone know what loudness curves are? I don't know. So these are like how you perceive loudness based on frequency and the actual like decibels of it. So it takes a lot more power for you to hear a low sound than it does for you to hear a high sound. But anyway, that little bump kind of on the right side where our formants are, where like the information that comes out of it talking, that's due to the little resonant chamber inside of our external auditory ear. So it boosts quite a lot. I don't know if I can move my mouse over there and show you. I got this part right here is where that external probably lost me. Okay, so the middle ear, everybody knows the middle ear. It's the show off, the eardrum. So, I mean, it's okay. It's just, a little overplayed at this point. Everybody knows how this works. So, like, this actually travels, this little bone that's attached there is, this isn't super important to talk, but just to kind of cover the whole thing. The bone travels from what's labeled the tympanic membrane over there to the oval window. And it's basically matching the thick liquid that's kind of behind the oval window to the air. So it's just kind of transferring it in an efficient way. It's not that important. This is where it really gets interesting, though. So this is like a resin cast of the cochlea inside of your ear. And the deep area, it looks like something out of the Cthulhu mythos. And it's like really, I don't know if I should swear, but it's like messed up. So the part that we're really interested in is the spiral part on the left side. That's where all the action happens. And that's where that little bone from the previous slide, the malleus or whatever, I'm not even going to try, the staples. That's where it transfers into there. This is filled with liquid. And so we can see like a cross-section of it. This is a much cuter version of the cochlea. The other one freaks you out. It can also be adorable. So like this is a cross-section of it. So there's actually like two tubes that are running all along it. And they're both filled with liquid. The two tubes I'm talking about are the scala tympani and the scala media or media. I don't speak Latin, so forgive me. So like the oval window is attached to the scala tympani. And then, obviously that's related to tympani because it's where the eardrum goes into. So the kind of function of this really is this middle part, the basilar membrane. That's the part that, actually does the heavy lifting here. And the liquid on either side of it is just basically to let it freely move in between the two liquids. So sound waves go into the scala tympani. And this is a picture, like you can imagine that you take that spiral and you just unwrap it and pull it out. And then you could just look at the basilar membrane by itself. When sound enters into the liquid, it kind of runs down the basilar membrane. You can see there's a wave kind of traveling along it. And so it's basically like this little hunk of meat in between these two fluids. And that waves travel down. Before I talk about exactly why that is or what that is, just want to remind everybody, everything has a resonant frequency. I just love any excuse to show this video, even though I'm sure everyone's seen it. It's just like really amazing to see everyone so calm walking around that dude. But like, yeah, this is like a, bigger, the the structure is, the bigger the kind of material it is, the lower the frequency is. And so this is like a super low wave from an earthquake, and it's resonating at exactly the right frequency for this bridge. And so that relates to, this is the guy, you haven't really seen that bothered. Okay, this does relate to it. It's not just an excuse. So the basilar membrane here too, this is another way of looking at it. When the sound enters in the beginning, it's like narrow and stiff. That's the base part of it. So it starts off kind of like, it's a hunk of meat, but it kind of changes texture as it goes along and also gets thicker, right? And at the end, it's wide and floppy. I don't know if this is a good description of it. And it actually, it physically gets wider as it goes along the spiral. And turns out the resonant frequencies along all those thicknesses, along this little slab of meat, correspond pretty evenly to the logarithmic scale, which is how we kind of perceive audio anyway. So like the thicker parts go down to 500, or it goes lower than that really, and then all the way up to 16. So this is, when the sound waves move along the basilar membrane, they peak at the places where it resonates. And you've probably heard of the hair cells inside of the inner ear, the cilia. So when they peak, those cilia activate and basically say, like, here's a frequency at 2 kilohertz, because it's activated exactly at that position, just because of the physical characteristics of that basilar membrane. It just resonates at that frequency. And this is also why, like, if you've ever used, like, frequency tools, FFTs, and, like, did anything in the frequency domain when you're at creating sound. That's why it's, like, so easy to understand, because, like, that's literally what's happening. This is, like, a physical FFT that's happening inside of our, like, it maps so well to the kind of frequency domain, so, yeah, also, like, as cilia, the hairs inside of there fall out, and that's what causes a lot of common kind of like aging-related or stress-related ear loss. And the reason why the high frequencies go first is just because that's the opening. They get the most action. Another interesting thing too is, like, well, later, I think. So, this is another way of looking at it when it's still curled up. It's just mapped to exact frequencies. So, go back to the loudness curves too, talking about how it takes a lot more power at the lower frequencies to hear anything. That's because they've got longer to travel along, and the liquid is very thick, so it's not very good at traveling down all the way to the end of your cochlea. So it just needs more power to get all the way there. So that's accounts for our hearing not so good down there. But that's not all the basilar membrane does, and this is pretty awesome. And it also generates sounds. So, like, the hair cells that I was mentioning that pick up the places where it resonates the most, there's like a reverse, you can send a reverse chemical signal. I don't exactly know how this is worked. It's called reverse transduction. I don't know how that, like, literally works, but somehow you can reverse the chemicals. That's what it says on the right. Tell me if you understand it. But that actually, like, instead of this, that actually causes the hairs to vibrate and causes the basilar membrane to start, like, generating actual sound. And so that reinforces sound. So basically, the overall process of what this is like, if a sound has been deemed important somehow, which I kind of get into in a little bit about how that works, the brain says, hey, reinforce that and make it stronger. So there's a feedback that's happening literally inside your inner ear. And it also, like, it also is what causes certain forms of tinnitus, not all of them. Like the reverse transduction or whatever that's causing those hair cells to resonate is an actual sound wave. So you can put a little microphone at the end of your ear and hear sound coming out of it. And, like, there's some types of hearing loss that work that way. They can tell that your cochlea is not reinforcing, because, like, this reinforcing process is, like, critical for you to hear things at a conscious level, because without it, the sounds are just too weak, really, to be of any importance. So it kind of, like, decides something's important, it boosts it up, and then you can hear it. So some people, when that process is broken for them, that causes a certain type of hearing loss, and they detect it by putting a microphone in your ear and saying, like, can I hear anything coming out of your ear? So, I mean, if you think about it, like, the hair cells are like microphones, and, you know, microphones can technically be used as speakers, and speakers can technically be used as microphones, so they're both a speaker and a microphone. You can think about it that way. Yeah, so what exactly gets reinforced, and how does the ear actually choose things to reinforce? So there's like a little bit of magic here that we don't fully understand, but like there's a lot of studies and we know what affects it. We know what's critical, like you know, as I mentioned earlier, the inaural time difference. If something is like has a pretty strong sync across both of your ears, it's determined to be important. You know, so like that goes through sound reinforcement. So then there's like the HRTF, like ear filtering stuff that does feed in there as well too. So like here's if you've got, I should say like, well, I guess it's a little different, but like if they've noticed a lot of sounds kind of like have a consistent phase changing over time, that'll kind of like, it'll boost those sounds. I don't know why I phrased this in such a weird way. Small ratio difference. Basically, like if something fits on the harmonic series, it's considered to be equal to each other, right? So like your brain kind of knows the harmonic series, and it boosts things that are like along the harmonic series, which leads to I don't know if you've ever experimented with this before, but like if you're in a crappy car and you've got like no bass in there, but you're like listening to a song with bass, you can actually like hear the bass still. It's because like your brain recognizes there's the harmonic series. It's only got the upper edge of it, but like I can go down and see what the root would be. And then it starts like reinforcing that and actually like creating sound where there was no sound before. It kind of like fills in the details for you, like literally creating sound inside of your inner ear. And then also, you know, it doesn't appear to be part of broadband noise. So like this is how, yeah, hold on. Sorry. Yeah, so this is how the sound reducing headphones work. I mean, as you know, they actually generate more sound. So by creating more sound, you create the broadband noise, and you're basically like masking the other sounds. And masking is an actual physical process, because if you think about the basilar membrane as the hunk of meat that it is, it can only bend so much in any direction, right? So masking occurs when it physically is bent, and so like when you have broadband noise, it can't peak anywhere because you've basically kind of like pushed it upwards a little bit. So and then the brain will throw that away because it knows that it's broadband noise. So that's why like we perceive it to sound quieter even when there's more noise. Yes. Oh, it's the next slide. Yeah, nice. Good transition. It always comes back to drinking. That's the. So, okay, all of that stuff happens before your kind of brain enters the picture, before the subconscious or the conscious has any real part of it. But there is one aspect of it, and this actually, so like they've measured the feedback loop for all those things that I've mentioned before, like how long does it take for the brain to start like boosting some signals inside of your inner ear. This one takes a little bit longer than the other ones, so that's because it goes into the actual brain part of it before it feeds back, and it's about attention. So you know, it turns out that part of the process of boosting is also involves what you're paying attention to. So you can kind of think about it this way: like your inner ear is like your own personal mixer when it comes to a lot of sounds. Like if it boosts things that you're paying attention to in a like very real physical sense, using the hair cells as speakers, and implicitly kind of filtering out and not boosting. You know, like I say filtering out, but it's actually just, it's not filtering. I mean, it's not boosting it, so it's essentially the same as boosting it. I mean, as not, it's filtering it out. Sorry. So, like, when you're in a really good conversation and someone's, like, shouting your name behind you, you, like, may not literally be not able to hear it at all because your attention is on this conversation, and it never even enters your subconscious, let alone your conscious, right? So in a very like real sense, we can like kind of drown out the rest of the world when we're well. I'm sure everyone's had that experience before. Okay. So bring it back to mixing. So like, what does this stuff teach us about mixing? So like, yeah, mud or lack of clarity or something. It's really down to the like physical structure of how this ear works, and down to like the basilar membrane like bending. So like, there's like a bunch of psychoacoustic like kind of like examples that you can look up online, and one of them is playing two sine waves really close to each other in a range where the basilar membrane will bend, and like one frequency will push it up really high, and the other frequency is so low that just the peak of it bending, you can't hear the other frequency at all, right? Does that make sense? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. This is also kind of related to the rule of three. I'm not sure if there's a better name for this. Probably is. But anyone that's like recorded violin, you might have noticed that solo violin sounds amazing. Three or more violins sounds just like this hazy, beautiful sound. But then when there's two violins playing, it sounds like cats dying. That's just obviously it's because always every violin player is always a little bit off. And so like when there's three or more, they kind of like they create that bend, like they resonate all, the basilar membrane will just bend like this in a very good way. When there's two, and each one of the harmonics that goes along it, they like one will be win and another one will win on the other one, and they'll step on each other's toes in weird ways, and it just sounds like off, right? And that's just due to the physical nature, and it also applies to like video games as well too, and like weapon sounds. If there's like three or more sounds of the same kind in any area, they'll step on each other's toes, and beyond three, you won't even kind of like know. You won't even be able to kind of like know there's how many there is if there's more than three, if there's a lot of action going on. But obviously spatialization matters on that. So like the whole inner ear difference and the HRTFs, if that's part of it, that'll help you separate them. So like three in different areas, you'll still be able to separate them, but this is like very localized, right? If there's three happening in one place, or if there's two, it'll start sounding pretty bad. I mean, one way that you could solve this is like, I'm not sure how viable this is in most games right now, but like if you put like a random all pass filter on any of them, just to kind of mess with the phases on them, just to kind of make sure that they don't have the same related phase to each other, that might help. So yeah, obviously frequency slotting, if you're not familiar with that from music, or basically it means just carving out making each sound have its own characteristic sound. I think this is, if you're not familiar with this, I think this is like really, really important. So like, I think that every single weapon that the player needs to be able to distinguish between, like every class needs to have like some sort of key area. This is how you mix music too, right? You filter out so the acoustic guitar is only here and it's not stepping on the voice, which is like filtered out here. But the cool thing with games is that you could do that dynamically as well too. As the sound gets further away, you might want to put more of the focus just on the kind of like key frequency range area that you want to do. And as it gets closer, you can kind of bring in some of the lower and higher parts and make it sound a bit more rich. You could also make your own first person sounds more rich compared to the third person as well too. But the key is that like, in multiplayer games, everybody could be in one place at once shooting, and you've got to have some sort of sense of where everybody is. You got to know what the difference between a footstep and, a gun, like firing a gun is. So like using frequency slotting and kind of balancing it off with like, making the sound still sound good when it's by itself, that kind of like helps you bring everything together and make everything really clear, and it's just due to the fact that we literally hear on the frequency scale, right? So you don't need actual low frequencies to hear actual bass. And so like, just as like a really practical thing, like you can get a lot more air in your mixes too by like just adding a little distortion to your bass and just cutting out the lower frequencies, because your ear will fill that out. you'll still be able to perceive them, even though they aren't there. Just like add some extra harmonics to it with a tiny bit of distortion. Um, you know, not like, you know, rock distortion or metal distortion, just a touch to bring up some extra frequencies. So I mean, you can add the feeling of bass, and because if you want to hear the bass all the time, then you're going to be overpowering the rest of your mix like really bad. Because also remember that low frequencies have to travel the entire like length of the basilar membrane. So bring it back to mixing. So like, yeah, attention really matters. You just can't hear the whole mix at once. You know, like, so I meditate a bit, and one of the meditation techniques is to sit and just like pay attention to everything. And like visually you can do that, kind of take in everything at once. But like the sound, you just literally cannot do that. Like when you focus on something, it literally boosts it in your brain. So like doing a mix, I mean, you really have to listen again and again, make sure that you're paying attention to each thing. And I think like when players are playing the game as well too, they're going to be listening for different things based on the scenario. You know, like if they're running across a field, they'll be listening for a sniper sound. If they're in close quarters, they'll be listening for like a assault rifle or something. You know, it's context specific. Yeah, just general. Be careful about broadband noise. You know, just be careful about noisy sounds in general. I mean, it's just easier to manage tonal stuff. But I mean, like, now you know how it works, so like you can just use it well. I don't know. This is something I've experimented with in another game a long time ago, but you know, like for gameplay reasons, obviously wasn't going to work. But like, if it's possible to have a little subtle sway on it, helps you spatialize a little bit. And that is basically it. Any questions? Yes. Yes. Transduction. Yeah.
Do you think / know if it would be possible to measure those frequencies that your ear is producing and then take something like those sleep buds, program it for those frequencies, feed that into your ear and cancel out this noise?
I don't think you could put a reverse thing, because that's hard enough to do. So the question is, could you like do the sound cancellation? Huh? I mean, but the thing is that it's so like when it's creating the sound, it's like creating it at the position where it's recorded. You can't just cancel it out. Like you can cancel, and it's hard enough to cancel things that are like the common setup is you have like the window with like a microphone on it, and then like a little speaker over here, and just the speed of sound is such that it makes it really hard to even cancel out those ones. But it's possible. But like this is happening so fast inside the ear that I don't think that's. But I think another way. I mean, I know they've measured it, and I actually wrote this down. Note I didn't say it. Like I've heard my friend's tinnitus before. It's pretty weird, but like and so like they can measure it and they can measure the frequency. I think probably a better way would be to like mask everything else around it, right? You know, like just have a notch filter right where their tinnitus is, and just like use the masking effect to kind of keep it. But I'm not sure. Like I'm not sure the mechanics of like how tinnitus accidentally boosts the wrong signals, right? So maybe that wouldn't work. They would know more about it. Yeah. Yeah, some forms of tinnitus are totally like at the brain level, like later on. And so like there's like distinct types where you can hear it. I don't know if did he measure it? Okay. Ask him about it. I would be interested in hearing what happens. Do you hear music? That man. Thank you.
There's a lot of excitement
Like, can you give me a specific example? Because Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. I mean, there's different parts of it. I mean, one is like the physical nature of waves; they can cancel each other out as well too. But I mean, that's more a problem for like digital sounds because they're exactly the same and can like phase and stuff. But like, I think what you're talking about is like it's like the phase of the frequencies that confuses the ear. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, okay, I get what you're saying. I think that happens at a later. I think that happens at a later period. Like I think that happens with the further processing. That's like this is all stuff that's like pretty quick. Like this is pretty. The time scale of these is like the window of time is pretty small. That's what these actions are happening on. But then what you're talking about is like a phase that does enter the brain where it's like we start kind of making sense of it, right? So like yeah, and that I think is like not as well understood. I mean, it's especially not as well understood by this person. But I think in the wider scientific, but I actually don't know that much about that as well too. So yeah, but yeah, it would be interesting to look at like what some other psychoacoustic effects that happen later in the chain could affect. It's like an association. Uh, I don't know how I can repeat this for the mic, but yeah, I mean, so like it's like you build up an association with it, and then like when it's gone, you still associate that sound as being part of it, and like yeah, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that even enters into the reinforcement as well too. I think that would be really interesting to know too, if that's actually like our expectation of the sound actually creates some of that sound too. I don't know. Just throwing that out there. Yeah, which one? There was like a lot of them. This one? Yeah, it's this is just not this one's not. I realized that as I was giving the presentation. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this doesn't even show all the way down to 22, but yeah. Yeah, it's yeah, okay. Go on. Sure, yeah. Yeah. I mean, infections tend to affect the whole entire thing. And so, like, you kind of hear everything muffled. And, I mean, perceptually, it would be kind of related to these loudness curves. If everything's muffled, you're not going to hear it evenly across the frequency range. But, like, yeah, I think if it gets punctured, the whole thing goes down if it gets damaged. I mean, I know that. I'm not saying I think it does. The whole thing will break down if like liquid leaves it because the liquid is like such a key part of it. So I think that the question about I guess I'm not repeating for the mic. You asked about some people being born with big uh, inner ears. Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's just like the length of it might be longer and stuff like that, and give you a longer and because it's really just down to. I mean, it could be affected by the same things of Gen X affects us all the time, like having bigger hands or like you know you know the shape of your nose or something like that, and it's just like it's something physical, right? So it can be manipulated too, right? Like you just as long as it like resonates along those frequencies, like that's the thing that matters. But I'm not aware of any like one thing that comes to mind would be like the bezel membrane's not very smoothly made, and it like might bump at certain things, or maybe if people that seems like it would probably be more common than not, just given how chaotic being born is, like existing. So like I could see that might be a thing, and maybe that is common. I have no idea, and I would think that maybe we would just deal with it.
Yeah.
We would just learn based on our own inner ear, right?
And then you said too, people don't filters change.
Yeah.
They adapt to it, so somebody might not even be aware that that membrane is funky.
Yeah. Because it would be difficult to imagine that everybody has like a perfectly created one. Yeah, this is getting really outside of my knowledge area, though. Yes.
So, you discussed how physical our perception of sound is.
Yeah.
The small motions with our heads and everything. Is, like, say with a gamer playing any game using just headphones.
Yeah.
Is that, like, just a natural handicap regardless? I mean, I know that you can't have small amounts of surround sound with headphones, but
I mean,
based on the fact that we can't, it's stuck to your head.
Yeah.
And those motions won't really help with your sound locating ability.
I mean, they also don't. For most games, they don't use HRTFs for like console games like that. I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, everyone, but I don't think that's super common. And certainly there's no like the NRL like time difference, because like if someone mixes it to mono, there would be like instant phasing issues, right? But like, so like that might kind of screw up your ability to do it. I mean, I think surround definitely is the best way to do it, because it's like in the physical space. Sounds are like literally in the physical space, so you're able to localize a lot better. But yeah, I think headphones would definitely affect your ability to position. Yeah.
Can you dig just a little deeper into how you would help the player localize? Because this is all about gameplay.
Yeah.
And say you're in a multiplayer shooter or whatever, and you want to know where those footsteps are coming from, or those gunshots.
Yeah.
And whether it's headphones or surround sound. I mean, obviously, if you're in surround sound, pane-potted mono will tell you the difference between in front of you to the left and behind you to the
Yeah.
left
Yeah.
versus headphones. But what other techniques or what other science is behind helping design gameplay in that?
For spatialization specifically.
For localization,
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of this talk was originally meant to be just about like keeping sound separate, and the spatialization stuff is kind of like tied in with that, but it's really difficult. I think like by making the sound kind of like distinct from each other and doing the frequency slotting thing, it lets you kind of know what sound it is. But the problem is like this is the same thing that we were just talking about, where you don't have the HRTFs and you don't have like the inner ear. There's like two really important pieces of information, like just can't really be done easily with games, unless you had like a menu where you would specifically, right? But I mean, if some games do that, I don't know what exactly goes into those processes, and maybe some of these do. But I think really just you have to do panning, and maybe like, I mean, panning's really your main thing, and keeping them distinct areas so they don't step on each other. I think that's like your only two real vehicles for headphone kind of mixing. I don't know if Andy, do you have any experience in this area as well too?
There are some headphone companies, there are some brainiac headphone developers that are starting to put drivers in headphones so that,
Oh, really?
yeah. And also, they're doing some modeling, some physical modeling on ear shapes. You can literally put your ear shape model in an app, just like an specifications.
Yeah, so I'm gonna repeat it for. Yeah, yeah. It does actually make a difference, but it's like, uh, so can I like repeat some of this for posterity? So there's like some headphones being made with gyroscopes in them, so that it can like make some of those minor head movements into position, and then like some that are like tuned to your ears. Can I say that I kind of feel that's a little snake oily, but I think that I think you can get used to different ear filtering really easily. I'm gonna keep calling them ear filters. I don't know why. HRTFs. And then the last point was talking about the sway. It does work, but like it might not work for every single game. I think like maybe for like the kind of games where they're a little bit more like survival orientated or something like that, and there's a little extra difficulty, they might be okay with it. But I think you'd have a pretty hard time convincing first-person shooter to make everything sway, and not just the sniper, you know. But it does when I was playing around with it before, it does work. It does make like the difference. And then also, talking about so Andy also mentioned point sources being the most accurate way to do positioning. Um, I mean, I think that really, because you don't have as many valves as there are in real life, so to speak, like, there's not as many things that you can play with, and it really is just down to like slotting and panning. Like, I think you have to work with extremes. Like, you have to like exaggerate it. So like point sources is extreme as you can get. Sounds sound really big if you spread them over like an area, really easily in games. Yes. Yeah, hopefully that would be. So the question is like, how do you, if your attention matters so much, how do you deal with that like during the initial kind of learning of the game? And I think that kind of fits very nicely with however the game does the tutorial for the rest of it. I mean, because like if you could say there's like a one-to-one mapping between like sounds and game like game features or game systems or something like that, like this is the sound for when this like game thing happens, right? Like those features or those kind of like systems will be hopefully in a well-designed game introduced one by one by one. So I think like that's not a problem that's unique to sounds. I think it's it ties into like game design in a bigger sense. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I think like it's very easy to overwhelm, and so like it's not something that players should ever be thrown into, right? I mean, especially for multiplayer games where you want to know what's going on at all times. Yeah. Any more questions? Okay, I'm calling it. Thank you.